Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. Despite some missteps, I'm really enjoying Star Trek Discovery. Season 1 was admittedly a bit of a mess, but Season 2 seemed like an apology, fixing the many mistakes that Season 1 made, bringing back Culber, expanding on Pike respectfully, and in fact making his eventual fate even more powerful by explicitly stating that he knew the outcome years prior and still did it. Closing out the Burnham-Spock arc, and finally, spoilers if you're not caught up, sending the USS Discovery into the far future of the Trek universe, shedding off the skin of a prequel, which is what we all wanted from the first place, so... And while I'm disappointed that my second favorite character, Ash Tyler, won't be joining the Discovery in the future, my all-time favorite character from the show will be sticking around. My favorite character, of course, being Ensign Sylvia Tilly. And I think my reasoning is that she's one of the most relatable characters in Star Trek. Certainly the most relatable on Discovery, like Regs Barclay was on TNG, except that she's a main cast member and not a recurring guest. She's not perfect, not stoic, she's got real feelings, and she acts the most like a real person. Again, just like Regs Barclay. Some people might find her annoying, but I adore her, and every scene that she's in is elevated by her mere presence. Plus, she dropped the first ever F-bomb on televised Star Trek.
You guys, this is so fucking cool!
Which a lot of people also dislike, but honestly, I don't know why we still make a big deal about the so-called swear words. It's 2019, they're a part of speech, and assuming that the words weren't born out of racial or social prejudice, they're just like any other words. But that's getting off topic. I liked the first two Discovery books fine, but I wasn't as excited for them as I was when I heard we were getting one dedicated to Tilly. So much so that while I picked this one and the Saru book up at the same time, and the Saru book was actually released first, I read this one first because Tilly just wins over Saru for me. And also because I'm honestly sort of bored of Georgiou and Burnham, who both feature in Saru's story. And Tilly's book was written by Una McCormack to boot. McCormack, in addition to having written several Trek novels before, so she gets the universe, she's also written for Doctor Who's expanded universe, including one of my all-time favorite Bernice Summerfield audio dramas, The Angel of History. So I have high hopes for this one. Let's see if McCormack does Tilly justice. This is The Way to the Stars. The cover is... I really don't know why I insist on talking about the covers for the Discovery books. They're all photo covers for marketing purposes, and are the bare minimum of what a book cover should be. We've got Tilly in front of a generic space background. It's a very nice space background, and I in particular like how it goes from blue to purple, but what does this tell us about the book? It has Tilly in it. And it takes place in space. Great. And that's it. What does Q2's cover tell us? It's got Picard, Trelane, and Q in it, and it features some sort of what appears to be a lightsaber battle, but could also be two figures, one of whom appears to be Picard firing phasers. An exciting scene that entices me to read the book. What does Desperate Hours cover tell us? It's got Burnham in it. What does Doomsday World's cover tell us? It has Data, Worf, and Geordi in it. And there's some sort of space battle between the Enterprise and a fleet of cool-looking ships. See the difference? They're relying on people picking these up by the virtue of them being tie-in novels. Do you know how I got into these books? Why I started reading Star Trek books? I was a fan of the show, sure, and I had heard about tie-in novels from the internet, but do you know how I chose my first one? I know they say don't judge a book by its cover, but that's a bad idiom because we do. We judge everything based on our first appearance, even if we think it's a bad thing to do. I went to the library, and I saw a cool-looking cover sitting on the shelf with all the other Star Trek books. Do you think I just picked one up because I saw pictures of Patrick Stewart or William Shatner on the cover? Hell no, I saw a goddamn oil painting. I don't remember which Star Trek book was my first, because there have been so many that I've read over the years, and it's been so long, but hell, the Entropy Effect, which has one of the most god-awful covers imaginable, look at that wasted white space, at the very least displays an interesting premise through the illustration that enticed me to read it. Sulu's got long hair and a mustache, and I've gotta know why. Do you get what I'm saying? These covers have no life, they have no substance. They simply ask you to read it because it features Tilly in it. It could have at the very least given us an image of, spoilers for later in the book, the freighter that Tilly stows away on, or images of other characters like Tilly's mom or dad or the school that Tilly attends. I won't pretend I'm an artist who knows how to encapsulate an entire book in a single image, but at least I know how to make it visually interesting. This is just boring. At the very least, it seems like future releases are starting to get the picture, with the release of the Enterprise War, which actually has a cover that's more my speed. On to the story. The prologue opens up on the USS Discovery at some point after the end of the first season, post-Klingon War, pre-Enterprise encounter, where Tilly is about to enter the command training program and is sitting awake at night, nervous, which means that this is actually the first Discovery novel to take place during the time frame of the show, and the first time that we get to read about the USS Discovery. Not sure why it took them this long, though if I had to guess, they're probably trying to avoid another Desperate Hours snafu, where the show completely supersedes the novel. Either that or CBS is mandating that the books don't contradict the show, and prequels, or books involving other ships, are the best way to do that. Remains to be seen what'll happen once we start getting books set after the new status quo. Anyway, Tilly is nervous and she and Burnham discuss it, with Tilly telling the story of how she ended up in Starfleet. The book is told in 4 parts, each demarcated by the passing of a season during a single year. In the autumn, 8 years earlier, Tilly had just turned 16, and her mother Siobhan is looking over her report card over video call. Her grades are good, but how do I put this nicely? Who cares? She's a fictional character. Tilly's mom is an absolute nightmare. She's overbearing and distant at the same time. She hasn't acknowledged that it's Tilly's birthday, yet she's controlling her interests, discouraging Tilly from mycology and trying to get her to follow the path that she followed to become a representative for the Federation Security Council, a job that is wholly unsuitable for Tilly. After the call ends, with Tilly not even getting a happy birthday from the woman who presumably should remember that day pretty vividly, and she expresses her disappointment to her grandmother and her step-grandfather, Adele and Quinn. Not that Quinn. If it was that Quinn, I'd bet he'd do the fade-to-white snap and give Tilly a better mother. Tilly's been living with her grandparents in France since her mother is her mother, and since her father is not only divorced from Siobhan, but he's also away on a long space mission aboard the USS Dorothy Garrett, and Tilly's enjoyed it because she's actually in a loving environment with guardians who encourage her interests. So, naturally, her mother's looking at boarding schools that will give Tilly a leg up in a career she doesn't want. I assume Tilly has a secret space Reddit account and frequents R raised by narcissists. Adele confronts Siobhan and demands that she give Tilly a birthday, which involves a trip to London, where Tilly has always wanted to visit. However, because Tilly's mom is a nightmare, this trip doesn't involve the academic pursuits of sightseeing in museums that Tilly wants, and instead involves shopping and makeovers, which are all fun for Siobhan, but not for Tilly. But she doesn't dare go against her mother. The closest she gets to what she wants to go is a musical, which Tilly would have preferred seeing a production of The Tempest at the Globe, but she'll settle, it's still theater. However, at the end of the night, Siobhan drops a bombshell. She's sending Tilly to a boarding school far away from Earth for future diplomats and statespeople. Tilly is sad to leave her grandparents on Earth, but despite reservations, she starts having fun on Talaris 4, making friends with her roommate Ricera, where she likely got her idea of roommates being built-in friends from, and she also gets involved with Ricera's friend group, who do a competitive rowing team together, which Tilly ends up being really good at, essentially becoming team captain by keeping rhythm with a drum. Tilly also forms an engineering club that, while not having a lot of interest since the school is more of a humanities school than a science school, Tilly was enjoying. Unfortunately, Siobhan strikes again. Her grades, while absolutely stellar in the eyes of the instructors, are not good enough for Siobhan, and she demands that Tilly either drop the engineering club or the rowing. Tilly drops the engineering club, despite that being her true interest, because her mother was more okay with rowing, since it's exercise, and exercise is good. Tilly starts to get stressed and concerned with her grades, alienating all her friends, even Ricera, who eventually leaves their shared room and moves in with another student because of a fight they had. This all comes to a head when Tilly botches a major presentation, showcasing an alien species that communicates via melodic quadratic equations that she had overthought, and being left alone right before winter break with no friends left, Tilly decides that she's not happy and busts out of school by modifying the tracking device that kept an eye on her, circumventing security measures and sneaking out. Tilly hitches a ride on a passing freighter, intending to get off at the next stop and get lost in the crowds of the non-allied, yet safe world. Unfortunately, such ideas rarely go as planned, as while she sleeps on the freighter with her legally purchased ticket, she's robbed of all her things by another rider. I'd say that's the worst thing that ever happened on a space freighter, but I think Adric might have some opinions about that. Because she lost her identification and personal effects, Tilly is forced to stay on the freighter until further notice, trying her best to stay one step ahead of the freighter's crew, who are on the lookout for a stowaway. The ship's chief engineer Sala finds her, and while at first she intends to turn her over to the captain, after seeing how terrified Tilly is and noticing how similar Tilly is to herself when she was a teenager, she decides to take Tilly under her wing and teach her about engineering. Since Tilly, in lieu of payment, had been fixing small issues she found on the ship during her time there. Of course, at the same time, the teachers on Talaris 4 realize that Tilly is missing, and they call in the cavalry, notifying Tilly's parents and grandparents and causing quite a commotion at the school, since Tilly vanishing speaks to two possibilities. Either she's a runaway, which means that Tilly outsmarted all their security measures to escape, which she did, or Tilly was kidnapped and someone else circumvented all their security measures to get in, neither of which are positive for the school. To her credit, Siobhan is actually genuinely concerned for Tilly's well-being during this time, so she shows she's not all bad. Sala and Tilly form quite a rapport during their time together, but Tilly's gotta leave sometime, and she's dropped off at a safe port on Zimna, a world that, to me, seems a lot like an old coal mining town. My mental image for it was Kokeberg from the finale of Quantum Leap, and it's a place where you've gotta work to survive. Tilly is given a maintenance job after adopting an alias, Zoe Trace, which sounds like a kick-ass name for a sci-fi heroine. Do you think McCormack would mind if I borrowed it? And she starts to find herself, coming out of her shell and shedding her anxieties and fears for a bit, fostering a few potential friendships. But all good things must come to an end, and Adele and Quinn show up to take her home, with her flying under the radar having been noticed, and the authorities notified. However, Quinn expresses to Adele that maybe Tilly should have a longer leash, given that while running away to a backwater planet was wildly dangerous, she managed to very nearly create an entirely new life, and Adele agrees, taking Tilly's side with Siobhan and telling her that she needs to cool it down on all the criticisms and let Tilly be Tilly. Siobhan reluctantly agrees, and Tilly is given one more surprise. Adele managed to get Tilly's father, Ian, to convince his captain, Holden, to reroute the USS Dorothy Garrett for a pickup. Tilly can't be left unsupervised, naturally, but she needs to be in an environment that suits her, and given the past few weeks, that place is a starship. Tilly is ecstatic to spend time with her father, and while Holden is unsure about one of her officers single-parenting while on duty, remember this is pre-original series, so families on starships are a very uncommon situation. Remember, Kirk doesn't even keep his nephew around after he's left an orphan, and Holden contacts Adele in order to ensure that every member of her crew, including Sylvia Tilly, are at their best during the voyage. Adele is more than happy to give Holden a list of Tilly's interests. Holden gives Tilly an outlet for her engineering prowess by setting her up with some of the engineers, who allow Tilly to help with non-critical projects, and Tilly makes a lot of friends. A while into the voyage, the ship is planning an archaeological away mission, and Tilly manages to convince Ian and Holden to allow her to come along. Unfortunately, in a traditionally Star Trek-like manner, they accidentally awaken an alien species living on the planet, who attack the away team. Tilly is immediately beamed up, leaving Ian behind as the away team falls into a hole. Well, it was nice knowing Ian. Although, he is a xenoarchaeologist, so blue shirts have a pretty decent track record of making it back. The planet then turns its sights on attacking the Dorothy Garrett, but Tilly realizes that the aliens' method of attack seems familiar. Melodic quadratic equations, which just so happens to be the method of communications of the species that Tilly showcased in her failed presentation back on Polaris 4 that she did a lot of research for.
This is the power of math, people!
Tilly goes down to the planet once more and starts to translate her voice into melody, managing to communicate and instigates first contact with the species. But that doesn't mean that Ian isn't furious that she put herself in danger. He grounds her, but in the face of her valor and intelligence, Holden recommends that Tilly apply to Starfleet Academy. Siobhan isn't happy about it, but Tilly manages to stand up to her somewhat, and Tilly accepts the offer for Starfleet. She gets in, obviously, and heads back to Earth, managing to patch up her relationship with Rysera before heading to San Francisco. Back in the present, Tilly finishes her tale, and Burnham manages to nail down what has Tilly so nervous. I didn't mention it earlier, but Tilly feels, like many children of divorce, that the divorce was her fault, and she's afraid that she isn't good enough. Burnham convinces Tilly to call Ian and ask why they divorced, which naturally had nothing to do with Tilly and had everything to do with her mother's behavior and their own incompatibility, giving Tilly a much-needed confidence boost as the novel ends. Before we go into Tilly's characterization in the book, I want to talk about her characterization in general. I saw a thread on the Daystrom Institute subreddit a few weeks ago that said that Tilly and Wesley Crusher were the same. And I actually agree with that. Tilly, I think, is Wesley done properly. Will Wheaton is great, and he is a great actor, but the writing in early Next Generation didn't do any of the characters, least of all Wesley, any favors. Tilly could have been, and of course some would argue that she is, annoying, but I think the real problem with Wesley was that during his establishing period, the show was still doing that dumb TNG humans are more evolved thing that made everyone come off sort of as assholes. Tilly was well established in a cast of other characters who interact like real people, thus I find her, perhaps annoying behavior, more humanizing than annoying. And it's that humanizing aspect that McCormick manages to nail down. Tilly does a bunch of things that, in the hands of a lesser writer, you'd hate her for it. The running away, the alienating her friends, but because we establish why she acts like that, especially through how this book shows her mother, her behavior is all perfectly explained. Tilly is clearly dealing with a lot of unresolved anxieties that don't get resolved until years after the story ends, given that Tilly's major anxiety is solved on the USS Discovery in the relative present. We get a great portrait of her early years, and it gives sufficient reason for her behavior on the USS Discovery. Maybe the reason that she didn't have a roommate was because she fell back into that alienation because of stresses in her courses, and knowing that she was working under Priest 4 Stamets means that she was probably very stressed. Her attempts to get to know Burnham were because she finally had a person who literally had no one else to turn to, because Burnham alienated the entirety of the Federation because of the mutiny, someone who got her. Of course, it didn't help that like 80% of the USS Shenzo's living crew ended up on Discovery. Now that I think about it, what if that was Lorca's doing because he wanted to stick it to Georgiou by taking her crew? While it might seem strange for Tilly's character development to shift back to the loner after all the development we got in this book, You have to remember that the way that Siobhan is, Tilly's character development is dropped back to the beginning whenever she talks to her mother. And speaking from personal experience, it's really easy to be comfortable and out of your shell around people that you've known for years. Like on the Dorothy Garrett with all the engineers who you befriended, but you throw a person like Tilly into an entirely new situation, and she'll need some time to warm up. Get to know me, and if I'm comfortable around you, I'm extremely personable and outgoing, but put me in a group of entirely new people that I don't know, and I withdraw and get all quiet. This entire thing is a roundabout way of saying that while I don't have the parental nightmare that Tilly had, and I'm pretty well adjusted, I identify a lot with Tilly and how she acts, same way I identify with characters like Barclay, Data, and Spock. So it's no surprise that I really like Tilly, and it helps that on the show, Mary Wiseman acts her out perfectly. But take away that acting, and Una McCormick manages to make that come across in the writing, and the voice is consistent between show and book. As a protagonist, Tilly is easy to like, and a delight to follow around. Her motivations are clear, and she's written precisely as she is on the show. If they ever do a solely Tilly-centric episode, I think that, like Michael Jan Friedman before her, Una McCormick should be able to write a script for the show proper. Tilly's mother is an absolute nightmare, but given what little we know about her from her short Treks appearance and Tilly's various mentions of her, she's written consistently with what we know, and she was horrendous. It's like Laxwana Troy, but without all the good qualities. Laxwana was a nightmare too, don't get me wrong, but her better qualities shined through in situations that didn't require her daughter to go missing for her to show genuine concern for her daughter's well-being. We only get a light glimmer of Siobhan being a good person, and it's when she thinks Tilly's been kidnapped, and for all we know, she was concerned about her other daughter herself, and just claimed her concern was for Tilly. Given that the switch flips back to massive bitch the moment Tilly returns, my guess is that it's the latter. On the flip side, Ian is a great father. Siobhan refuses to call Tilly Tilly, only calling her Sylvia, which Tilly dislikes. Ian, while not getting it right every time, manages at the very least to put in the effort, and at the very least, his usage of her name is from his special nickname for her, Sills, so it's not a huge jump to go to Tills. And while living together, while it's a strain on him, given that he has real work to do, he's always supportive and kind to Tilly. Understandable that he and Siobhan divorced, because they're like Kermit and Miss Piggy. Although, that's really insulting to say. Miss Piggy has a lot of good qualities that Siobhan lacks. Adele and Quinn are great too. Adele is a force to be reckoned with, and is Laxwana Troy if she was a supportive mother to Deanna all the time. She cares about Tilly and is the only person woman enough to stand up to Siobhan because, of course, she's the parent in that situation, which makes for a very interesting dynamic with one of Tilly's main cheerleaders being someone who can force Siobhan to cooperate with Tilly's interests. There's a teacher at Talaris 4, Miss Keith, who tells Tilly to follow her passions and not her mother's desires, who I didn't touch on that much in the summary, but she is a breath of fresh air, and reminds me of all of my favorite teachers, the ones who inspired free thought and not just following orders. And the various students are all unique and interesting, especially Ricera, who, despite being an upper-crust future senator or something, manages to be very reasonable, although at times she seems to disregard Tilly's plans to go beyond her mother's rigid plan, because unlike Tilly, she wants to follow that path. But she's entirely in the right when Tilly becomes unreasonable, and I don't blame her for leaving and not spending time with Tilly. Captain Holden is great too. Like I've been saying, families on starships were pretty unheard of during this period, so the fact that she allows Tilly to stay and actually gets involved in Tilly's activities is a display of what type of captain she is, one who trusts her officers, but also wants to ensure that they have all the stuff they need to do their jobs properly. Someone like Kirk or Picard would probably have had her sent back to Earth immediately. Holden is different, and I'd like to see more of Holden in spin-off media, maybe in a Waypoint comic or something. And Sala, the engineer of the freighter, is also an interesting character. Reminds me a lot of Tasha Yar in that she escaped a war-torn planet to make a new life for herself in the stars. The fact that she warms up to Tilly and shares her backstory because she sees herself in Tilly make a character that could have just been a surly engineer have a unique part in the story, given the effect that her short-time mentoring has on Tilly. Why is Burnham involved in the story? Not why is she here in general, because the framing narrative makes sense, Tilly telling a story to someone, and the only one on Discovery who will listen to her ramble is Burnham. But why did Burnham impact the ending? Let's clear the air here. I don't hate Burnham. I actually really like Burnham, and not just because we share a first name. But an issue with a show like Discovery, as opposed to every other Trek series, is that Burnham is our viewpoint character, but also the main star. So every event impacts her personally. Whereas The Next Generation or Deep Space Nine, while having a larger focus on the captains, tended to remain as an ensemble show, giving focus to every character on the bridge. Sometimes things would happen and Picard wouldn't even be present for them. In Discovery, we don't really get to see an expansion on anyone but Burnham unless the plot requires it. We didn't know jack shit about Ariam until the episode where she died. So when we finally get expansion on Tilly, a character that I care about because her past is a mystery, Burnham has to show up and influence things. Tilly could have very well asked her father on her own or been spurred on by telling the story to Burnham, since people tend to work through problems better when they explain it to someone else without Burnham explicitly telling her. It sounds to me like you never did ask him what you wanted to ask him. Maybe you should ask him. Burnham shouldn't be getting the credit for Tilly's character development is all I'm saying, because she gets all the credit in the show that's basically all about her already. Tilly gets one book, Burnham got at least 2 seasons and her own book. The book is really enjoyable because in the 4 parts we get distinct areas of activity. We get to see Tilly's school life, her life on the freighter, and her life on the USS Dorothy Garrett. Unlike the other 2 Disco books I've read, which read like extended Star Trek episodes, this one feels more like the novelization of a film or a mini-series about Tilly, which I'd honestly love to see. We never spend more time than we need to in any part, and the story moves quickly and provides excitement for the entire run. We get starship shenanigans, a coming-of-age runaway story, and copious amounts of motherly neglect. There's no boredom in this novel, and the page real estate is used exceptionally well, with every page giving a valued insight or an interesting event. There's some exposition to establish stuff, but it's the classic Star Trek exposition, and never feels heavy-handed or forced. The omniscient narration gives us a good insight into Tilly's inner machinations, though I feel like this might have benefited from a first-person narration, given that it was Tilly telling a story. But the narration as it stands works and gives us Tilly's inner thoughts, almost as if Tilly herself is telling the story from a third-person perspective, so I'll forgive it. Otherwise, the novel is perfect structure-wise. Star Trek Discovery, The Way to the Stars, if you haven't already figured it out from the previous comments, is phenomenal. It not only features my favorite character, but it expands upon her in a perfect way, giving a setting that lends itself easily to Tilly's adventures. We establish a history that will likely be superseded in the show at some point, but that doesn't make it any less interesting or fun, though it's a tad depressing to think about what'll happen to Ian, Adele, Quinn, and all of Tilly's friends after she vanishes, defeating Control. But McCormack knocks it out of the park with this one, and I highly recommend it if you're a fan of Discovery and are hankering for more Tilly. And if you're not a fan of Tilly, this might make you change your opinion a little bit, so give it a shot. Next time, it's finally time to do our first Patreon-sponsored video game review. May the Force be with me.